John McAfee. Yeah, that name probably makes you think of that antivirus pop-up on your parents' old computer. But the man behind the software? Well, he lived a life that was way more spy thriller than tech manual. He was a brilliant programmer, a presidential candidate, an international fugitive, and now the center of one of the internet's wildest conspiracy theories. So today, we're going to dive into the chaotic, dangerous, and deeply mysterious life and death of John McAfee.
So let's actually start near the end of his story, because honestly, it just casts a shadow over everything else. In October of 2020, sitting in a Spanish jail cell, McAfee drops this tweet. It's incredibly specific, right? He's not just talking about suicide, he's drawing a direct line to Jeffrey Epstein, another super high-profile death in custody. He was basically planting a flag, telling the world, hey, if you hear I killed myself, don't you believe it?
And then just 8 months later, it happens. The exact scenario he warned everyone about comes true. On June 23rd, 2021, and get this, it's just hours after a Spanish court says, yep, you're getting extradited to the US, John McAfee is found dead. The official cause? Suicide. So that leaves us with this massive, glaring question: how does a guy who so publicly warned against this very thing end up dead by that very means? To even begin to understand, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning. Okay, so before all the craziness, before the guns, the paranoia, the life on the run, John McAfee was a legitimate Silicon Valley pioneer. He was in the perfect place at the perfect time, and he had a brilliant idea that was about to make him unbelievably rich. Back in 1986, the first big PC virus, called Brain, started making the rounds, and McAfee spotted a golden opportunity. He developed VirusScan, one of the very first programs to fight this new digital plague. But his real genius wasn't just in the code, it was in the marketing. He masterfully used the media to whip up a frenzy about a so-called doomsday virus named Michelangelo, and it sent people sprinting to buy his software. It was really our first glimpse of the master manipulator he would become. And oh, did it work. By the early 90s, his company had a staggering 67% of the market. They had like 20 employees and were raking in millions. As one of his old colleagues put it, they were literally printing money. McAfee wasn't just a tech guy anymore. He was the king of a new digital empire. And yeah, McAfee's eccentricity, that wasn't something that just popped up later in life. Oh, no. The culture at his company was a total reflection of him. Intense, bizarre, just out there. Former employees talk about this cult-like vibe where people would sleep under their desks for days on end. There were rumors about a group of women who are supposedly witches chanting in the conference rooms, and even a company-wide sex contest called Little Foxes. This pattern of creating his own strange reality with its own set of rules, it would basically define the rest of his life. So after cashing out of his company, McAfee ends up losing a huge chunk of his fortune in the 2008 financial crisis. So what does he do? He completely reinvents himself. Again. He moves to Belize, looking for what he called an entrepreneur's paradise. But as you can probably guess, paradise was about to turn into a nightmare. On the surface, McAfee played the part of this generous, wealthy expat. He was donating boats and gear to the local police, making friends. But behind the gates of his massive compound, a completely different, much darker story was playing out. He surrounded himself with armed bodyguards, who he disturbingly called his hitmen, and his paranoia was just growing by the day. And this is where things take a truly awful turn. McAfee hired a brilliant Harvard microbiologist named Allison Adenizio to help him start a natural medicine company. One night, she told him she was planning to leave. Later, she mentioned she had a headache. He brought her 2 pills and a glass of orange juice. Adenizio alleges that he drugged her. Her next memory is just horrifying, waking up in pain, bleeding, with McAfee standing over her, naked. Her account paints a picture of a man who wasn't just eccentric anymore, but was dangerously predatory. Her escape was just as terrifying. She locked herself in her lab and started frantically emailing her dad for help. The moment she hit send on that email, the power to the entire compound was cut. McAfee was pounding on her door, screaming at her. Then he left and came back with a gun. She only got out because friends showed up just in time to rescue her. McAfee's life in Belize was already a powder keg, but one specific event would flip the switch, turning him from a paranoid tycoon into an international fugitive. And it all started, of all things, with his dogs.
So his neighbor, another American expat named Gregory Fall, got fed up with McAfee's aggressive dogs and filed a police complaint. Nothing happened. Then McAfee's dogs were found poisoned. He was furious and immediately pointed the finger at Fall. The very next day, Gregory Fall was found dead in his home, executed with a gunshot to the back of the head. And just like that, McAfee was named a person of interest by the police.
So, does John McAfee cooperate with the police? Of course not. Instead, he does what he does best. He creates an absolute circus. He goes on the run and turns his escape into a global media spectacle, all while claiming the government of Belize was trying to assassinate him. It was completely bizarre. He was giving interviews to major news outlets while wearing these ridiculous disguises. He snuck into Guatemala, where he got caught because a reporter forgot to scrub the GPS data from a photo. So, to avoid being sent back to Belize, he faked a heart attack so convincingly that he ended up in a hospital. In the end, he got deported to the US, which of course he later claimed was his master plan the entire time. And then, just when you think this story cannot get any weirder, this international fugitive, literally fresh off the plane, decides to run for president of the United States. He campaigned as a libertarian, talking about cybersecurity and personal freedom, using his newfound infamy to become a kind of folk hero to some, and a complete lunatic to others. Which, finally, brings us back to where we started. After all that, after running for president, living on a boat, constantly taunting the US government, the party finally came to an end. He was arrested at the Barcelona airport just as he was about to get on a flight to Turkey. And the charges? They weren't for murder in Belize. It was for something much more mundane: years of tax evasion in the United States. He was thrown into a Spanish prison to await extradition, and it was from that very cell that he sent that fateful tweet. So we're left with the million-dollar question, the one that still fuels endless debate online. Did a cornered, paranoid man facing the rest of his life in prison finally give up? Or was he silenced? Just like he predicted he would be. All right, let's actually break down the arguments here, because there's a lot to unpack. The case for suicide, it's pretty strong. He was 75, he was facing what would have been a life sentence, he had a long documented history of severe paranoia and heavy drug use. Plus, let's be honest, he was a pathological liar. That tweet could have easily been his final act of manipulation. But the arguments for foul play are just as compelling. I mean, he literally predicted his own death. His widow swears he wasn't suicidal. And then you have the wilder stuff. Theories about a dead man's switch full of government secrets, and that bizarre WHACKD tattoo he had on his arm. And probably the most powerful voice arguing against the suicide theory is his wife, Janice. She said that just hours before he died, they spoke on the phone. He told her he loved her and that he would call her that night. For her, those are not the words of a man who's about to take his own life. So, who was the real John McAfee? A brilliant tech pioneer destroyed by his own paranoia and demons? A master manipulator who was playing one last, epic game with all of us from beyond the grave? Or was he exactly what he claimed to be, a man who knew too much and was finally silenced for it? His story is just a tangled web of contradictions, and in the end, the truth might have died with him in that Barcelona cell.